this. And in the interim, we're considering a phased approach for stabilization of the shoreline in the immediate area. And again, I'll hand this over to Chris Creed with Olson Associates to provide an update on the work that they've completed so far and what we intend to do in the near term.
Thanks, Brian. Good morning. Thank you for having me back. Again, Chris Creed with Olson Associates. So the slides are somewhat repetitive to things that you have seen me present in the past, but they do represent a lot of additional work that we have done, and I'll explain that in just a minute since the last time we met. I believe it was in October when we met. And the idea was to advance on some past conversations we had had about concepts and to update information on those, particularly quantities that might be required to construct those and what the cost expectations might be under current market conditions, which have changed considerably since we first started talking about this in 2018, 2019, which was when we first really began the process of developing some concepts here. So I know there's some new members. Again, my name is Chris Creed. I'm a coastal engineer out of Jacksonville, Florida, but we work all over the southeastern United States on shorefront restoration and stabilization projects. Our principal focus is on beach restoration, but we also have considerable experience in shoreline restoration when stabilization using armoring structures, groins, breakwaters, revetments, and things like that on the insular shorelines like the Southport shoreline. And so we work from Virginia to Alabama in the southeast U.S. with a focus of our practice in the state of Florida. But another local client that we have is the Village of Ballhead Island, who we've worked with for almost 30 years. And if you have any more questions about any of our background, we have a website, and you can also ask me later on about any of that. So I know, again, there's some new folks, and I try to give a little background real quick. So the original objective that we were tasked with was to look at the shoreline problem along the 4,000 feet of shoreline from the marina over to about Bonnets Creek. And it's a highly diverse shoreline, principally characterized by some sand and hard rock revetments that have been constructed in the past by various sources. On the left, the mostly sand. There is also what we call the Army Corps, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers revetment, which protects the lift station on the more western portion of the shoreline. And then the walls and revetment represent the areas around the waterfront park and the roadway right here, these rock revetments. These are walls which are not protected by riprap right now, and we have seen historically repeated damage to these walls because they're not protected by any fronting either sand or wave energy dissipating type structures like a revetment. So they're very subject to very high wave forces that are repetitive, and during storm events, that's why we can see a lot of overtopping and damage to those wood walls, wood and vinyl walls. And then moving on to the east toward what we call the mostly private parcels to the east of the shoreline, characterized again by wooden walls that are privately owned and maintained, and also it transitions further to the east into what we've got is a marsh shoreline, or a gray-green shoreline. It has some small riprap structures out there protecting the Spartina grass marsh to the lee of that, which is an important feature that we've kind of leaned on in our concept development to say, wow, it seems to be doing pretty well over there, and those areas seem to experience less damage when we have significant storm events. So could we expand that? However, there is a debate about we're working in the private areas where there's some private ownership of these parcels. And so I'll get into that, into the concepts again in a minute. But we're subdividing the area because it is so different in its existing characteristics, from the sand beaches to revetments to walls to marsh shorelines, that we really need to think about subdividing the area. And one size might not fit all. We may have a different approach for each one of these reaches. Detailed design assessment. So what we've done recently, we did work back in 2018-19, and the amount of information that was available to us was pretty limited. It was enough for us to develop some concepts, but it wasn't us to get really sound and a high level of confidence in quantities of materials we thought it would take to construct some of these concepts. But also it's been quite a bit of time since we have done that from a cost perspective to understand what the current market condition is. So what we've been doing recently through the current task and a previous one about a year ago, we've updated some of the survey conditions offshore and along the shoreline to really understand what the elevations are and what it's like below the waterline out here that we can't see. And using techniques to characterize that, survey techniques, we've done a really high resolution survey that's helped us understand the quantities and some of the depths, the water depths that are really close to our project area and how that might affect decisions we make, and also and what the cost might be for those decisions. Again, there have been some changes in the existing shore protection features. Most recently on the eastern end out here, we've put some riprap revetments in front of the road. That needs to be considered. We've gone back and looked again at the wave climate, expectations of the recreational boat wave, the frequency and occurrence and magnitude of those waves, as well as ship waves. We've talked for a long time about you'd have a current ship wave problem. They're not the most severe forces you might experience here, but these are expected to increase should there be the anticipated deepening of the port channel that is moving along at a rapid pace right now. And I don't know if anyone in the city is keeping up with that. We've participated in several workshops recently on behalf of the Village of Ballhead Island, where the Corps of Engineers is talking about the plans for that and the status of that. So it's...
Sir, do they have a timeline when they think they're going to start that?
Not a specific timeline at this point. It's still going to be several years away. They're still in plan development phase, and also they haven't even started the permitting for it at this point. And they're still looking for funding, but a lot of these port deepening projects are getting funded out of Washington. So the funding will eventually come. It just depends on how much it'll be to what they ultimately do.
Did they give any indication about mitigation?
No. Which is a good question for communities along the lower Cape Fear River to ask, is how are you going to mitigate these impacts that are going to be created by these changes? And so that's an important, well, that's why we're working with the Village of Ballhead Island. They're on the front lines of that problem. So in terms of mitigation, they would just want more sand. But in areas like this, I mean, sand is not going to be the only solution for that. There's going to be other ways and funding is one of those. Hey, we're not going to oppose your project, but we're going to be impacted, and we would like compensation for that is the concept of that conversation. Tides and currents aren't that much different, but the last one is we're still looking at what's the future sea level rise expectations. And so when we've gone through this analysis more recently with the updated data, we've determined that we do need to increase some of the crest elevations of the structures we're proposing to anticipate future sea level rises, as well as some of the differences in the wave conditions and whatnot that we've looked at now to characterize those. So we've made changes to the design concepts in terms of cross section, which has increased some of the quantities of materials. And those will be reflected later on when I talk about cost. Again, I think we showed this last time. This is a detailed the map of the survey of what we prepared last year with a local firm, McKim and Creed, out of Wilmington. And deep blues are deep water. This is the channel. You can see this is where they dredged. Oh, wow. Okay, don't touch that. The very straight line, that's because they purposely did that. But what is really important to us in planning a project is that white line is the minus 20-foot contour where I've traced it along there. And you can see that it gets very close to portions of your shoreline here. You don't have to go very far out to be in 20 feet of water. On the western end, on the eastern end, it is a little more pronounced about how close it is. But on the western end, we do have some shallower water depths. And those differences in depth affect ultimately what the cost will be on the quantities of material it will take to implement these various solutions. This is more background, talking about, for those who are new, things that we've talked about with the city for a long time about what are the goals of the city Obviously, shore protection is important. You've had repeated events where the shore protection measures here are not sufficient, that they don't need constant maintenance. After a storm event, you got to go put the pieces back together. It would be better if it were designed for a particular storm conditions, so that if you have a storm, you just had a storm and you just go on about your business with minimal maintenance required, unless you have a very severe storm. You know, recreational access to the water's edge is important. Right now it's difficult to access the water along the shoreline. You're not going to be Oak Island where you're going to be able to swim and surf and things like that, but you know, access to the water is important on some form. Restoration of the beach, possibly in the dune and marsh habitat where appropriate. Planning for future sea level rise. You guys are on the front line of sea level rise, particularly along the eastern end of the... Okay, yeah, on the eastern end of the shoreline here, where you have fairly frequent, even sunny day flooding. They call them sunny day flooding events on your spring tides.
So regardless of what plan we pick, so we're going to pick one of these plans sooner or later, is there a limit that what our expectations should be for storms? And I'm not talking about category of a hurricane, because that's wind-driven as opposed to water-driven, because our system of categorizing hurricanes is somewhat archaic. By storm surge, in other words, either one of these plans that we put in, is there some kind of science behind it that it should hold up until X storm surge, so that we have expectations of what we're buying into, the citizens understand that, and we can move forward. I'm not smart enough to know how to do all of that, but do you understand what we're trying to get at?
I do. Flooding this will not solve your flooding problem, because
I'm not asking to stop the flooding. We can't stop the surge coming in. But after the surge came in, if we were to put these, whatever these little X things are out there, would they be out in the middle of the harbor someplace because they're all washed away? Or would they stay there and we could move on after that?
Yeah, right. So I'm going to go back a slide here. The analysis that we've been doing recently really focuses on these right here in the waves, because these structures, these rocks that we would use, even in these revetments, are sized for design wave conditions. And that we've spent a lot of time over the last 6 to 8 weeks looking at the wave climate here, because that will, although it's not directly inserted into the concept development here, it is important to understand how high we might want to make these structures, so it gets into quantity. But when we go into the design phase, how big do the rocks need to be stable for these design conditions? We do not want them to move. Much like the revetment, you've had some history here of the revetment having impacts after a major storm event. Some of that, I know there's been recent improvements of that, but early on, the rocks were just too small. So there's a lot of science that goes behind it, but you look at the hydrodynamic stability of these rocks for these design conditions, so they don't move, because what you want them to be there to serve their function during the storm event. And so that's part of the design process, and it's very common. And so that would all be included in this.
We would get, after you're finished doing your background work here, we would get an idea. It's hard to get I think it would be hard to get like a 20-foot storm surge because of that island out there. But those things happen on the big hurricanes. And if we got a storm surge of, I don't know, whatever number of feet that is, I just want to make sure that we are all under the expectation that man makes things and the oceans can wash them away. At what point should we think might be a failure of them?
Well, hopefully so these structures are most vulnerable when they're not completely inundated. So that's when the waves impact, the water level comes up and the waves impact them, and they're stable for that condition. If the water gets too high, the waves go right over them, and they don't move. They're less vulnerable when they're under 20 feet of water than they are when the waves are directly impacting them. Now, let's say we want to put a revetment out here in front of the hotel. We want to make sure that in that situation that the rocks are not going to get picked up and thrown through the windows, you know, that they're not going to move in that direction either. So there will be a lot of care taken into that to ensure that they are hydrodynamically stable for these design conditions. Now, you know, you have that 20-foot storm surge, and you're going to have a lot of other problems and besides boulders moving around. But still, yeah, there's care taken in that. That's why we're spending so much time in advance to establish what these design conditions need to be. And we've looked at the ship waves, we've looked at the wind waves on top of storm surge levels, and we've looked at the frequency of the boat wake. And the wind-driven waves during a storm event is really your design condition. Even the ship waves, because the channel is so far away here, by the time they get here, they're moving a lot of water, but they're not impacting. So the problem with the ship waves are going to be the scour around the foundation of these structures. So we have to treat that foundation with a particular type of, we use a stone-filled geotextile mattress for that type of scour protection, because when you have these large, long period flows that go back and forth, they can move a lot of sediments at the toe of the structure. We don't want them to collapse into a scour hole.
Is that like a draw? Like
Right,
the boat's
exactly.
draw?
Yeah, when it puts the surge
Okay,
in and
all
the
right.
surge out.
All right, I've been scared to ask this question, but I want to get this. As a child playing on Pebble Beach, which is down here, and watching these ships come in, the draw was way more when I was, and I don't know if it was because I was a child or not, but it was a much more profound draw. As they've deepened the channel, the draw isn't as bad. You can't even see it sometimes.
Well, they could have
my-
slowed the ships down too. It is a function of ship speed.
I'm friends with a lot of captains, and I don't think so. But we have people that live on the waterfront, and so I'm interested in that. Like you were talking about, the deeper we go, is that going to make it worse, really, or is it going to help?
It's not the depth of the channel. It's what they anticipate putting in it when they deepen it. The ship sizes are going to be significantly larger and more frequent. Is our understanding, and that's kind of the business model of every East Coast port in the U.S. We build it deeper, the ships are going to be bigger, and they're going to come more often. And so that's the expectation. And some of the preliminary analysis that have been done by the Corps have suggested that there will be changes along a portion of the eastern, down around the Marsh shoreline. There will be an increase in the wave loading from the ship traffic. That's not been quantified, and mitigation for that has not been discussed. But it's a Section 203 report. It's about, you stack them up, it's about this thick. But somewhere in that report, at the engine, I think Appendix A of that report, and you can get it on the Corps' website, in Wilmington District's website, Section 203 study, in the engineering appendix. It goes through all the it goes through all the design condition analysis for that, how it's going to be affected. So
I'm going to reverse his question. Do you model what you're going to do to withstand a certain condition? And what would that condition, again, same question he was asking, do you model this shoreline to withstand Hurricane 2, Hurricane 3, Hurricane 4?
indirectly, we're looking at wave heights again. Wave heights are your design condition here.
Okay.
Yeah, so storm surge is one thing. If it will support a big enough wave, but you go through what we call in our wave analysis, and wind waves being, and I'm really getting into the weeds here, stop me if it's too deep, but for your wind waves, you had 3 limiting conditions on how big that wave can get. You can get fetch limited, fetch meaning how wide is it to the other shoreline, and if the wind blows across it for, at a certain magnitude, 100 miles an hour, how big can those waves get when they only have that much distance to generate? It's fetch limited. Then we have duration limited. If the wind blows for a week and you have unlimited fetch, how big could the waves get at that point? And then we also look at depth limited. When the water gets shallow enough, the waves will break. And so we look at all three of those scenarios and we pick the biggest one. We look at, okay, is it going to be a fetch limited wave? Is it going to be a duration limited wave? Or is it going to be a depth limited wave? And we look at all three of them. And then we pick the biggest one. So what's the one that's the biggest and also the best chance of occurring? And then we go back and design the rock sizes and the structure configurations to accommodate those waves. Because again, we have determined, we believe from a design perspective, that the waves generated by wind are the most critical design condition here. Now we have the Ballhead Island Ferry, it comes all the time. And I think that would be more of a problem. Those waves are not huge compared to some of the wind waves that can be generated, but they occur all the time. So if we were looking at a unstabilized beach restoration project, like where we're looking at erosion rates like we do on the ocean, the Ballhead Island Ferry would be a big factor in that because it occurs so frequently and is always moving sand. But the concepts that we have here is we don't believe that you could put sand out here and not stabilize it. It will not stay. And so we're going to have to stabilize it, and through these stabilizing structures, it will be able to withstand that frequent traffic from the Ballhead Island Ferry. So we go through all that.
The BHI ferries, they come through, particularly Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, when they're running 2 boats, sometimes 3. Their standing orders are you take it out really easy, and then you don't tack it up till you make the curve here. But still, there's a tremendous amount of water. And if they're running 2 or 3 boats because of the passenger load, we're getting beat to death here. Now, if you take a look at the ships coming in, it more or less rolls in from them. But those ferries and the pleasure craft, I mean, they just beat us to death.
Yeah.
So other than the wind-driven stuff, which is only a couple of times a year, hopefully, they're far more dangerous than the wind-driven stuff because of the frequency.
Yep. But the magnitude of the waves, again, compared to if you had a 25-year hurricane, those waves are pretty small. And so we're concerned about the big event moving stuff around, and we're going to lock it down. And and the intent is it'll be over-designed for the ferry wave magnitude. It'll just take a beating all the time.
It'll be the least of our worries.
Should be. That's the goal. That's what we're after. So, we've gone through these design conditions again, and we're updating all that, and it'll get. And I want to talk about what we're thinking in terms of moving forward with what we've talked about in terms of concepts in the past. We're anticipating obviously larger, more frequent boat traffic, ship traffic. And the maintenance is a big issue. We want to design something and build it that your long-term maintenance is minimized. And there will be opportunities when you invest in this shoreline as a community using public money. You will be eligible, should you have a major storm event, and I don't know if the city's ever done this before, you can go after FEMA money under Category G. And their disaster assistance, that the FEMA will work to put at 75% cost sharing, 75% FEMA, 25% local non-federal, non-FEMA, and in most states, half of that is carried by the state, so you get down to 12.5% out of the local community to put back whatever damage. Now, quantifying what you did, demonstrating an intent to maintain it, and then documenting the damage when it occurs is necessary to be eligible for that money. And we do it for beach projects all over the Southeast. And other hard infrastructure, even revetments and other things where the design conditions are exceeded and damages occur. So that can be eligible.
I just want to make sure we capture that for the minutes because I was not familiar with that concept. So if we've taken government money to do something and it fails, we can go back to FEMA and ask the government to fix it at 75% for the feds, maybe 12.5% from the state, and our end would be 12.5%.
For a named storm.
Well, everything's named now.
Yeah.
So even a tropical storm is named.
Yep.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Yeah, and we can give you, we can help you. for a lot of our clients, we do these FEMA reports for them where once the project is built, we document it in a report, how you've invested your money, what your maintenance plan is. And so when the event does occur, should it occur, first thing you hand us FEMA is your report. Well, here's what we built. And then you go through a process, you hire a consultant, they go do a quick survey and do a damage assessment. And you quantify what the damage was, and then you start working with FEMA too. It's a reimbursable program. You have to spend the money up front, and FEMA reimburses you, but it's very successful for a lot of communities.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, it's a reimbursable program. So you have to demonstrate to FEMA there's an intent to restore what was damaged, and when you restore it, you have an agreement with FEMA. It's called a project worksheet for the declared event, and then when you spend that money, you are eligible for reimbursement for the money you spent.
So we need to
Well,
be,
our experience in the speed of reimbursement is disappointing, so we would have to upfront, right?
You would, but FEMA's pretty good, particularly for damaged communities. Look what's going on in Southwest Florida right now. After all those major storms last year and all that devastation in the Fort Myers area, FEMA has a full-time office down there right now, working with this program to help those communities put themselves back together.
so we need to be prepared to re-spend $7 million prior to being able to be reimbursed for it, essentially, because you mentioned the $5 million wasn't going to be enough.
Well, let's say $5 million.
Okay.
We're hopeful if you had damage, it's not going to cost $5 million to repair it. We know you're only going to repair what was damaged. So hopefully it's only, let's say it's $1 million or $500,000. Yeah. So it's all not going to be gone. Beach restoration projects, for example, they might spend $30 million on these things, but we find that there was only $3 million of damage due to the storm. Things like that.
So I'm just thinking out loud for the board, not necessarily for you. When we're having our fund that we put for our rainy day fund, we have to make sure that we have enough money not only for the emergency of other things that we have to fix that FEMA is not going to reimburse us on, but we should be thinking about how much money a storm might be. Let's say it's $3 million or $2 million. We would need to have that kind of money in the bank already, because we can't generate, our funding streams are too small
Or have
to
access
generate
to
it anytime
Have
quickly.
access to it.
And our past experience with FEMA, which may be part of our process, is that it takes 4 years before we get anything.
So you have experience with in the FEMA program, the Disaster Public Assistance Program?
Yes, but it has not been quick. But I don't know which side of the ledger that's on.
There's a lot of details out there, and I'm just pointing it out that this is something that you should keep in mind, and we'll get, so we hopefully, you kind of plan for the worst and hope for the best, and hopefully you never have to use the program. So bottom line, we've added this. We've been instructed at this point that we have $5 million to work with. And we need to think about that, and that's what we've been doing, since we met in October, is how do we use the $5 million and how do we help you use it, which will ultimately end up what we believe will be a phased approach should you do that. So this is what Chris Creed drew and thought this was a fantastic idea. And we've talked about this for several years now. Which is a very, very robust restoration and stabilization of the Southport shoreline, but very, very expensive. And this was really created before we had this detailed water depth information. And so we didn't really know what that would mean in terms of, was it even feasible to build this in this configuration, and how much would it cost? And now that we have this more detailed information, we have some updated thoughts on that. But the idea is, and the other concepts that we'll talk about during the presentation will be variations of this. These are the stabilizing structures, which are made out of boulders, much like a revetment. They are shaped like that. And one of my partners, Dr. Kevin Bodge, is like, he's like the master of these things. He created the science behind developing them. But the relationship, the geometric positions of these structures relative to where the beach position is situated is, you have to look at the spacing between the structures and the location of the hedge relative to each other. It's very involved, but we have some really, really nice examples where all over the world where this has worked for us. And then we transition from that and kind of expanding upon the theme of the marsh, stabilized marsh to the east there. This is an ambitious project, and it is a super complicated project and maybe very difficult to permit as well. And it is given current market conditions and what we know about the site with our updated information, is very, very expensive. Well beyond what your current budget amount is, or grant amount. But it is something that, a starting point in terms of ideas that could be implemented. So let's expand on that with some different ideas. So the things that we're using for tools, the tools in our toolbox to think about restoration ideas and stabilization ideas for the city include these segmented breakwaters, as we call them, T-head segmented breakwaters with the crenulate embayments for the sand beach. This is Fort Clinch State Park. I like to use this example. This example is 25 years old because a federal navigation channel is immediately adjacent to this park, to this fort building, and it also has a Navy channel in it that goes down to almost 60 feet at Kings Bay, where the East Coast ballistic submarines come in and out. So a lot of heavy traffic here, more from the Navy than it is commercial, unlike here. But, we've stabilized this shoreline with these structures and protected the fort for a long time. They do benefit periodically from sand placement, from maintenance dredging of the port channel here. And so there is some benefit there as that. But very complicated, a lot of the same problems that we have in Southport. So I like using that as an example here. Then the revetment idea, you guys are familiar with that. You've built one recently down by the road. There's also one around the lift station and all along the road here. That is a revetment. And then the living shoreline, this is actually a photograph from Southport where you have the riprap stone in front of the Spartina Marsh. And the riprap stone serves to break the waves so that the grass can exist. If wave heights get too high, the grass will disappear. So we believe the wave climate is too high along the Southport shoreline to be able to expand on the marsh idea without structures. So, but this has been very effective based upon my observations, and I think yours as well. These houses that are protected by this seem to fare a little better during storm events than where we don't have that. So I've broken it down now into option A and option B, and I think you guys have some briefing materials, and I'll explain my thought process, and I've talked to Bob quite a bit on the idea of how to do this, and where those priorities are. And these are the priorities that I've, in my mind, which I think might be priorities, but they might not be reflective of your priorities. So let's kind of talk through that, and that's really what we're looking for back, is feedback from the board today, so that we can take the next step on how to do that. And the next step would be starting to get engaged with the regulatory agencies. So area one, we'll go from left to right in the build up here, is to expand upon what you already have. And this is not new concept here, but it is to restore the sand beach at the south end, at the east end, sorry. At the east end and stay. Oh, the west, thank you. The shoreline orientation here, I think north-south. Do a lot of work on the East Coast, but yeah, it's west end. So we have a couple of breakwaters and a T-head structure that we basically build a beach cell. This would be, the structures here would to stabilize placed sand. So the major feature here are 3 rock structures designed to be stable under those design conditions, sand placed behind those so that when we do have elevated water levels and wave conditions, there would be minimal sand loss from behind those structures. The structures would be stable, but the real goal is to not lose the sand during the event.
That part of this whole waterfront is probably the most citizen-used part of the waterfront because they can get down to it currently because there's sand there. With the structures and stuff that are there, is there access to that sand? Can the
From the wa-
average
from the
person
water
walk
side?
there?
Yeah, oh, of course, yeah, yes. So let's go back to the, let's go back to like this beach here. This is what this is what it would look like, more or less. The structures may be a little more buried than these. The erosional stress here is very, very high. But yeah, once the structures are in place, you have the sand beaches behind them, and you can access the water. Oh, excuse me. Stop touching the screen. You can access the water through the gaps. And so you could, from both sides, if you were in a kayak, you could paddle up to it. But the structures are key to keeping the sand there. I think we'd have a very difficult time permitting simply sand placement down there. There is a concern from the Corps that they've expressed this in the past. If we place this sand here, does it increase the shoaling in the marina?
Let me get this. Can I? So the locals claim, there's a flow along the shoreline in that location. And these revetments, the last time I saw a presentation, they were working on the revetments capturing that shoreline flow, tide coming in, tide going out. And when it goes out, that's sort of like the elbow, where it flows that direction towards the marina and will fill up the marina. So our revetments need to be able to hold that sand or catch the sand before it turns that corner and like they're concerned about.
The idea here would be, we're going to put the sand there and lock it down. It's not moving, would be the goal. Now, periodically, this could be one of the maintenance events. You may have to periodically put a little more sand in there to keep those conditions, particularly after a major storm. Maybe it depends on what the type of event it is. But the idea is that these structures will lock them there. They're like sand magnets. Once you build those, it's staying. The sand will.
What about growing? What about growing? Will they grow?
Well, no, there's no sand source. There's no sand. That's the problem. There's no source of sand coming to it from somewhere else. So pretty much what you place there is what you're going to have.
What do you think?
A question I have from folks who live and have businesses in the yacht basin is this going to do anything toward raising the water level? In other words, raising the bottom of is this going to shift sand, anything around the corner into the yacht basin? It's going to affect the marsh? Is it going to affect the level of the water? And the wave
It would not
action.
affect the level of the water.
So it's not going to raise the bottom, which is already shallow.
Well, right here is going to be dry. We're going to put a beach back out there, so you're going to have a wider sandy beach. So, but the intent is there will be no change in the marina itself, but here it's just going to widen the beach like a beach restoration. It's going to, where it's very eroded and scoured right now, we would widen it out, but then we would build these structures to stop it, to lock that sand down. And, you know, the view would be a little different because you're going to see these segmented structures, but the idea is that you would have a nice, stable beach at that point. That's the goal.
To build that beach, you're going to have to dredge sand into there?
We would bring it from an upland mine.
Okay.
Upland mine, because the quantity is so small, it wouldn't mobilization of a dredge and the pipeline and equipment cost would just be way too extreme for a sand quantity that size.
That, going down to the very corner of that light blue is where American Fish is. And I'm not talking about I don't care about the restaurant so much, but that channel there is not all that wide there. If we're building that out, will that narrow the ICW channel?
No,
Okay,
it's not going to be anywhere near it.
all right, good.
Well, and for those that haven't been here as long as some of us, we used to have a very substantial beach in that area. When I was a kid, we used to launch the sailboats for the youth sailing camp from that beach. And what is left of a small dock and pier that is down there now used to have sand that went out almost I would say 3/4 of the way underneath that. So it's a very different shoreline that we have now than what we had even 20 years ago. It's significantly changed in that time. The beach as it was then, if we're looking at protruding back out even to the level where it was, didn't affect the waterway and the boat traffic in the waterway then. And as far as I know, and Mark, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong here, it didn't affect the yacht basin at that time either, even when we didn't have something in place to try and keep that sand in place there.
The good old days. Back when the erosional stress was not as high and the sand stayed on its own, those days are gone.
One more comment, and I'm gonna leave it alone. The intercoastal waterway was an unnatural thing. We dug a water source that changed the flow of the water. And we're dealing with that 100 years later.
And this will help. So I hate to do this to you guys. Let me just, because I hate flipping slides back and forth, but this is important. So can everyone see this pretty well? This is the intercoastal waterway here. This is the marina basin here. Where we're talking about doing this is in this little area here, very long way away from where the intercoastal waterway is. Just wanted to point that out. And honestly, I think it'd be great to do a graphic here with those channels placed on this graphic, and we can definitely do that to help everyone see that. And honestly, the regulatory agencies are probably going to force us to do that, so we'll deal with that when it gets to that point.
A question. We're looking at aerial views and aerial maps and so on. Do you actually have a picture or some kind of a representation of what these structures would look like from the shore?
I do.
Let's say you're standing or sitting on this nice beach. What are you going to be looking at?
I wish I could open my website right now. We have pictures on our website. So you'll need to post some signs, stay off the rocks, and you got a pretty hazardous shoreline here anyway. But we always encourage communities to put signage up on these structures to keep the public off. It doesn't always work. They're kind of fishing attractants. People like to stand on them and fish and things like that. So you may have to establish some rules with what you would allow or not allow, should you choose to do this. But our recommendation here, if you're going to do anything along this reach of shoreline, Area 1, sand restoration, going back to it's restoration. It's back to a previous condition. It's not new. Restoring it back to a historical condition has to be stabilized. And so we wouldn't recommend just putting sand there. I'm not sure we would get a permit because of the potential risk of it going to the Marina Channel. But if you chose to do that, you would have to understand it's a good chance it's not going to stay. So those are just some thoughts in deciding what to do with Area 1. And I like this conversation the way it's going right now in these segmented pieces, because every reach of shoreline is a little bit different. And the way we want to help you spend your money, we need to be thinking about these segments.
One of the things I think I heard you say is when we do all this, in essence, we're creating a potential hazard. We're going to have to put up all kinds of signage to tell people, don't go up here. And that I think might be a bit difficult to enforce. That attractive nuisance, so to speak.
Well, like I said, you've got a lot of rocks on, you got a lot of structures on your shoreline already. I drove around the shoreline on the way to the meeting this morning, and there was a woman with a young child on the Coors revetment down there playing in the rocks. And so it's happening every day right now. What this does is provide a sand beach, and hopefully they'll stay on the sand beach and not on the rocks. So I think it would just take some education and some signage to and this is very, very common. We've put structures, like I said, beaches all over the place, and it's just something we have to deal with. But the community's decided that the use of the structures and the benefit those provide in terms of stabilizing the beach outweigh, their and maybe potential increased management of that.
Chris, when you're going in Bald Head and you're going into the ferry landing for Bald Head to the left, aren't there a couple of these types of
There are.
revetments that
And we did those.
y'all could go see?
Yeah. Yeah, so we did those, so it's called Rowboat Row, I think they call it over there. And for the same reasons, there was a significant erosion problem, downdrifted the marina entrance, and they couldn't address it, just they were trying to bypass the sand across the marina entrance and put it on the beach, and it wouldn't stay. And so we said, look, if you wanted to stay, this is what you got to do, and it's worked well.
Field
Yeah,
trip.
so that would give you, going back to the question about how does it look from the beach, go to lunch at Bald Head one afternoon and go stand on the beach and see what they look like. That would be one way to. Yeah, board retreat. So let's keep those thoughts in mind with Area 1, and let's move on to Area 2. And we've kind of walked away from the idea of trying to do this same concept in front of where the bulkheads project so far seaward. You really would have to push everything out pretty far to end up with the same result that we're going to try to end up with here. And so, but still, there's a shore protection need along this area where we just have these vertical bulkheads made out of vinyl and wood. And I remember when I forget which storm it wasn't long after, here at the park, there'd been a pretty big storm event, it had been overtopped, and the little wooden bulkhead was pretty threatened. You know, there'd been a lot of scour behind the wall, and everything was taped off, the public couldn't get down there. And so the idea would be that the revetment concept, expanding the revetment there, where one doesn't exist, and putting an appropriate crest elevation on that revetment, which might be a little higher than the wooden walls, to try to reduce the frequency of wave overtopping and the frequency of impacts to that reach of shoreline. Now, you're not going to have access to the water, but you are going to have more shore protection there, and from all types of waves that occur, the ship waves, the ferry waves, the recreational boat waves, and the wind waves. But your real risk of overtopping occurs during your storm conditions and your elevated water level conditions with your storm surge, and then you have the wind on top of that. That's what pushes that water on shore with the breaking waves and gets it up and over. It will not eliminate all of it, but the goal would be to reduce the frequency. And when you get some wave breaking on the revetment, it also just reduces the impact forces of the waves once they get to that point. So really, Area 2, particularly given current funding levels that you have, really I think we need to focus on a revetment type approach here.
So the last time, I'm sorry, Mark, I'm sorry, Rebecca.
So when we're talking about revetment in this Area 2, as it stands right now, you can go down from the pier and get onto the beach area and use that as, I mean, I wouldn't call it swimmable beach, but it's definitely a shelling and sea glass, and it's recreational enjoyment for the city of Southport right now. Are we talking about taking away the ability to use any of that by doing this in this revetment?
It would cover all that up. Yep.
Okay.
That would, yeah, it would eliminate access along shore. So that's a goal too, right? I mean, you've got a shore protection problem, but you also have this balance of recreation. Anything you do is going to cover up what you just talked about, whether it's sand and breakwaters or it's revetment. I mean, changing the status quo will pretty much eliminate what you're talking about.
The last time you were here, one of the do-outs was checking with the landowners that go down there and looking at what documents had to be signed, if any had to be signed. Have we progressed along that line at all? Do we have documents that have been signed off on? Have we talked to the landowners? Do we know, is this going to, I thought the object was that we would do that process in the past 5-6 months so that if a decision is made, we're not 6 months behind doing paper flow after we made a decision. So do we have anything from the landowners?
Yeah.
I guess the short answer to that is no. We haven't determined yet, and that's one of the reasons that we're here today, is to determine what type of shoreline stabilization protection methods may be necessary, because that's going to impact the amount of encumbrance, if you will, onto private property owners. So hopefully through the end of this meeting today, we'll have an idea of which way we're proceeding, and then we can initiate that discussion with the private homeowners and how many of them there are. Now, clearly we have more private homeowners toward the eastern end than we do the western end, and based on the discussions we have today, we may or may not even be impacting the homeowners at the eastern end. So as a result of this meeting, we'll have the direction we need in order to proceed along not only with the homeowners, but with the permitting agencies, and I think that's one of the topics that Chris is going to discuss as well, is the permitting impacts.
All right, so my next statement has nothing to do with any of you gentlemen, because but for the average citizen, we're now going into year 7. We've been talking about this for 7 years now, 7 hurricane seasons. And so when I'm out and about talking to people, they're asking me, it's been 7 years, what are you doing? And so I'm just trying to figure out once we make a decision, once this board makes a decision, how many more hurricane seasons do we go through before we actually get something that will help us out on this? It's because, once again, this is a city issue about when do we pull the trigger to do something, and it's on the city's end, I believe, at least that's my personal opinion, that the 7 years has been mostly on our side because we haven't pushed the issue. But now it's 7 years, and we have to be able to talk to the community about, we understand that, and now we're moving forward, and I'm hoping by the end of the day, we'll have a better idea of timelines.
You're correct, yes.
Chris, can we go back to Area 1 versus Area 2? I understand they're very, very different when we're talking about sand in Area 1 versus the style of beach that we have in Area 2. I understand needing enough space between the channel and our shoreline in order to give the channel and the boaters a chance to have their space. We have the pier that protrudes out. Would doing breakwaters at maybe the same distance out as the pier not be an option for us, where we're not losing the recreational use of our current beach area by the pier, and still with the breaks there? I mean, not bringing in additional sand for that, leaving it as is. But as you said, those breakwaters kind of lock the sand in place. Would that be an option, to lock what's there in place? Boaters would still have the ability to come in within that area and use it for recreational fishing if they were doing that. And we're not taking away the recreational aspect of it for our citizens who walk down and use that beach for shelling and all of that.
Yeah, the short answer is no. I mean, and I understand the concern, but you are kind of caught between a rock and a hard place here. It gets deep really fast. And these type of structures that are needed to stabilize, whether it's a revetment or these little small breakwaters, the only way you're going to build them and make them work is in relatively shallow water. If you push them too far seaward, the amount of material it takes to build them, to build the seafloor up to get to that elevation, becomes massive.
And you were saying the 25-foot drop, it comes pretty,
it's
pretty close.
It's very close. It's very close. And yeah, particularly here, it's not quite as close along the wooden bulkheads in Area 2, but it's still pretty close, and these structures keep getting bigger and bigger. The pier itself is probably in 30 feet of water at the end of it. It's really, really deep. And we just, you can't build these types of applications in that type of water depths. You know, we're concerned about how big of waves that water depth can carry, right? I mean, we're worried about the water depth from two perspectives.
The slope of the terrain underneath would determine how big the wave gets once it gets to the bulkhead,
Right.
right? So you do need a little bit of slope before you get to the rock underwater.
Well, flat is better. Yeah, flat, well, the waves will break on the flat water. I mean, once they get there, it's about 80% of the water depth, the waves.
When you say revetments, are these strictly rocks, or are these steel? Are they wood?
I would recommend rocks here. Or, I mean, you could go with a steel wall along that area to increase we haven't looked at that. I mean, that's such an aggressive application, but if access to that area is important, then, you know, implementing a concrete cap steel wall that has more of a seawall versus a bulkhead that is more of a engineered and structural solution can be considered. The cost is going to be a different issue. And we're going to get to the cost in a minute, and we can circle back on some of these topics. But that's my immediate comment on that. That has not been expressed in the past as a goal. I would just put it that way. So.
Sounds like one of the things we're having to look at here is the difference between protection and recreation.
Correct.
So, you know, we're going to have to give up one for the other, and it's up to us to say, okay, which one are we going to do? So we've got something to put on our plate right there.
It's a balance, right? I mean, that's what we're trying to walk you through right now. Is that, you know, recreation area 1, shore protection area 2. And when we get to the cost, it might start coming into focus a little better in a minute. But we'll see where this goes. Let me kind of finish my thought process on these options. And these are great questions, great conversation, of course. And so I think it's important to have this and air all this out, because you are ultimately the user, right? You're the community. This is going to be yours. And you guys need to be happy with what you're getting. My job is to try to educate you to help you make your decisions. So let's go ahead to Area 3. In Area 3, we're standing right in front of Area 3. I'm using the pier as a dividing point on these areas. I think we've gone a little bit to the east before, but I figured it's cleaner to talk about if we use the pier. Again, really deep water here. We have a functional revetment in place. Some enhancements may be warranted to make it a little better than it is right now, but for the most part, it's working. And I think the frequency of maintenance you've had to do since you've done some recent repairs has been reduced, but there may still be some need to do some type of treatments here, and that's why I'm talking that revetment enhancement is a pretty de minimis activity in the Area 3 for option A. And then we've included Area 4 as the marsh area, and we're not going to focus on that. I will give you what I believe the cost will be, but given that there is some conversation about does the city get involved in that right now, particularly with the funding amounts you have in place right now, we're going to focus on areas 1 to 3 in the conversation. So that's option A. So option B is just a slight variation of option A, only to the extent that we've gone back to the structures here, where we have more public access and shoreline, where the restoration of that might be easier to achieve. It's not so pronounced. You're kind of set back here a little bit. We do have the water depths are greatest here, so we've got that problem to deal with. But again, this would be, you know, stabilized beach, revetment, stabilized beach, and then we have Area 4 down there again. And because of the water depths, this new information we have here, you're going to see there's a significant cost difference between option A and option B, exclusively because of what we did here.
And this is from the city pier, option 3, I mean, Area 3 is from the city pier going this direction?
Right, so this direction to where we get to the private bulkheads down here, kind of this whole area.
But we already have this pile of rock out right in front of this building. What happens to that?
It would be buried.
I'm sorry?
It would be buried under that option. We would just put it under, it would be there, line of last resort. It's not going anywhere, but we would build on top of that.
But sand would be on top of it.
That would be the goal, right?
Okay, thanks.
So, really trying to boil this down because, I've talked to Bob recently. He's like, look, we need to focus on the $5 million right now. How do we stay within that budget and how do we spend it on time? Two very important objectives right now, in addition to all these other parts of the conversation that we're having. So, let's get into the cost and then we can circle back. These are the assumptions we've made right now. The current grant amount at $5 million. We're going to say that just for planning, engineering, design, construction, engineering, and inspection, the whole soft cost, they call it, to get us, to deliver a project through permitting, we're going to assume that's going to be $500,000 just for discussion purposes. There is a lot of environmental work that would need to be done, so this would include the sub-consultants too that are involved in that process of the permitting, the Davy group specifically. Some of the decision-making, and Bob warned me to not get too deep into this right now, but there are some intricacies of the permitting process that might need to be kept in mind to be able to keep things on schedule. There is critical habitat for the listed species of sturgeon in the Lower Cape Fear River, and if you go beyond the -6 foot contour, you enter critical habitat. And so that can complicate the permitting process. So we have to keep that in mind too with timelines and the amount of money that we're spending. Anyway, that's an aside, but I'm using it for right now for this cost analysis, which is an analysis, it is an opinion of probable cost, and it's something to help decision making at this point. So we've got, assuming $4.5 million for a construction budget out of your $5 million grant. A lot of numbers here, and I know I didn't provide these on paper because I was waiting for some of these unit costs. We really were careful this time. I've spent a lot of time with local industry representatives who do this type of work in this part of North Carolina on what some of these unit costs for materials delivered by truck from the upland, not by barge. It changes the program. But we would assume we would come up with project scenarios where the materials could be delivered and deployed by the upland. So we've got a mobilization cost of about $150,000. Again, this is purely an opinion. But these sand costs, so we're breaking them down. I'm breaking this down into areas 1, 2, and 3. This is option A. So you can see the subtotals for each of these areas as laid out in this scenario are, so for area 1, there's 3 principal elements that we would need. We need a foundation, which is the geogrid mattress under these rock breakwaters. Pretty expensive foundation because of the scour risk that we're worried about. The riprap itself, which is the rock, number of tons, and the sand by cubic yard, delivered from an upland mine. Unit cost of $45 in place for the sand, $200 a ton in place for the rock, which is not too different than what you guys experienced recently. I understood that the rock delivered to your site was $140 before you touched it per ton. I got a little better pricing than that from the industry in place, so I used $200 as a number for this planning exercise at this point, which is not inconsistent with what we're finding in other parts of the Southeast right now for this type of rock. You do have access to granite, but it's not far away. In Florida, we have to put granite on trains and take it down there, so we usually use lime rock a lot. And then the mattresses, that is a product that we use, and they're fabricated and pretty easy to deploy. Actually, they make the project pretty easy to build. So that's area 1. Just that area alone, about $2.7 million following this scenario here. Area 2, this is the revetment along the wooden bulkheads, and the vinyl bulkheads. That is the tons of riprap and a geotextile fabric treatment. We would not in that area, given the amount of rubble that's in that place with the revetment. We don't think we'd have to be as worried as much about scour. We'd use a little different and cheaper geotextile foundation treatment, but that whole area is about $1.3, $1.5 million. And then area 3 with some pretty minor enhancements. We around, just enhancements. We're looking at maybe adding a layer of stone, a little bigger, a couple layers of stone, and then maybe working on the toe treatment for some foundation. This is just for the planning exercise. Less than $1 million for that. But all in, Without a contingency, you're at $4.6 million for this right here. These basic, very basic treatments. I have thrown a 15% contingency down at the bottom just as, and just complete transparency for you guys to look at it. And, you know, unfortunately, like I said, you don't have it in front of you to study, but if you want to take it home and study, obviously we can seek input.
So we would technically, or theoretically, I should say, be on the hook for about $1 million. Because we've already encumbered 500,000.
Right, yeah, 800 to $1 million.
Yeah, okay.
Now, but, you know, you could choose to do areas 1 and 2.
Or we could, we're going to budget cycle, we have other options, but I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page, that the delta between what we were given and what this may cost, including the 15%
Contingency, yeah.
contingency, is approximately $1 million.
Right. If you choose,
Well-
I think you brought up the point, you know, you already have a pretty decent revetment right here. You may choose that for a future phase.
Yeah, I think we've got to,
And we'll talk about phasing. I mean, it was kind of, one of my young engineers was working on this with me. He's like, how did you know this was going to cost $4.5 million? I was like, I don't know, we just did. That's just the way it worked out.
You knew how much money we had.
Well, I didn't tell him how much, I let him work the problem. He didn't reverse engineer it. He did it from scratch. So anyway, but that would be an option here, right? It's just to do 1 and 2 if this.
I understand that, but if we wanted to do all 3, as we go forward, I'm not saying this is a bad thing. This is a good conversation. Is that we may have to be looking at. Now we're not building this tomorrow, so we're not indebted for the $1 million yet. We would have to look at if we wanted to do it, how could we fund potentially $1 million, and that's just part of the discussion. That's all I wanted to highlight.
Right.
Yeah, this is all good. Thanks.
So, option B gets a little bad, and the difference is the area 1 and area 2 are exactly the same. Area 3 went from 600,000, 700,000 to 4.3 million because of it's deeper. Quantities of rock went way up, and I had the guy go back and repeat this 3 times. I was like, "Are you sure?" But just with that newer survey and this, you know, and that the beach and how much sand it would take and how much rock, given the water depths out there, to make this work. And like I said, there's this geometric relationship between these structures. They have to be positioned far enough offshore and close enough together so that the beach stays seaward of the rocks. You wouldn't want to put a bunch of breakwaters out there and end up with a revetment right behind them. You would, if you're going to invest in this, you would want there to be a residual sand beach that you could use. And so what we believe, based upon our current analysis, is that it's a really, really significant cost. Not quite double Area 1, but a pretty good bit more, and that's purely due to the increase in the quantities. Our unit costs are exactly the same for the materials and the foundation treatment. So, you know, that would really, for Area 3, the city would really want to have that. That would have to be important to you to do that. And again, that's why I like looking at this stuff in phases, because as Bob mentioned earlier, you're still looking for money. And when we go into this next phase of permitting, do we permit the city's goals and give you the options to build these in phases? Because you can get a permit and you don't have to build it all. The permit doesn't mandate you to build it. It gives you permission to build it if you choose to. And during that regulatory process, you can also have the conversation of phasing. The city doesn't have funding they only have funding for areas 1 and 2 right now, and this is the immediate goals. But long term, they want to do all 4 phases. And it could be that you enter in some type of, you know, relationship with the private interest up here, that they fund part of it, and the city builds it in some type of, I mean, we see that all the time in other scenarios. So, you know, option B at this point is not doable with your current grant amount. And then marsh enhancement, I just threw in here one last second, one last time. We didn't do a lot of work on the marsh enhancement. We're kind of working with the quantities we had last time. The two surveys are not substantively different, but we did update the unit cost of the materials. And with the 15% contingency, we're up around $1.4 million for all that work. And it's a pretty significant reach of the shoreline. It's probably 40% of the shoreline, 35 to 40% of the overall area. So, next step is then we could circle back. Got to select a plan. Got to figure out how we're going to approach the problem, phasing, things like that. What's important, what's not, what we want to do in terms of restoring areas, enhancing some areas, and then preparing them potentially for future work, should you want to come back and add to that in the future. And then we're going to get into the state and federal permitting process, which, depending upon which direction we want to go, could be very complicated. I will step back on the phased approach. I know this is a lot of information, but that critical habitat for the sturgeon could slow things down. But if critical habitat for the sturgeon is only affecting area 3, then maybe we just permit areas 1 and 2 right now. And that would accelerate.
So to clear this up in my head, we could break the permitting process into segments as well. So we ask for 1 and 2, which would be quicker than if we added 1, 2, and 3, because 1 and 2 would be held up because we're still waiting for 3 to get done. Is that, right? Am I hearing that correctly?
We do, yes. That would be my goal. We have an interagency meeting planned. We have to do a pre-application meeting. It's a conversation I want to have with the agencies, give feedback. But we do that in lots of other instances where I'm doing it at Hilton Head Island right now. I'm permitting a $30 million beachfill project right now. And there's a section of shoreline that has critical habitat for the piping plover. And it's one little bitty section out of 16 miles of shoreline. We're permitting that section completely different. And it was like, if we don't get the permits, but we can't hold up this entire 95% of the island over this one bird issue. And so that's a strategy. We've been successful with the agencies before, and it could be something we need to consider here. Should we get that type of feedback from them?
I certainly like that. My next question is that we had for section 3, 2 options. One was twice as much as the other one. If you permitted for the most expensive one, and then finally, which was the most, I would say, I don't know if there's a right word, intrusive, and then you decided at the end only to do the lesser one, would you have to go back and re-permit it again, even though it's less?
You don't have to do, not if it's less.
Not if it's less.
Because what you're really doing, what you're permitting is the footprint of the impact.
Okay.
And so if you're inside that permitted, now what you would do at the end is you're going to report back to the agencies what you did, and you want to demonstrate that you did it inside the footprint that you had talked about previously, and then they would put that in the record that this is all you built. Since
there's a likelihood that we might do this in sections like 1 and 2 first, because of the timelines and everything else, what's the downside of asking for 3 to be permitted for the most expensive version, and then deciding later on we don't want to do that? Is there a downside to doing that?
The only one I can think of is that sturgeon critical habitat issue. If that slows it down, you may want to think about not doing it right now.
Well, no, I don't mean doing it now. I'm talking about, so we permit for 1 and 2 with the idea we're going to work on 1 and 2. Mm-hmm. We start the permitting process for section 3, doing the most aggressive one. It sits there, it bubbles through the system, and at the end of the day, we either don't have the money or we choose, whatever reason we choose, to go for the lesser program. Is there a downside in that strategy?
No, not if it's separate. No.
Okay.
Well, you know, and really, I think if you just said I'm going to permit areas 1 and 2, permitting revetment's easy. I mean, you probably do that with a nationwide permit, maybe with the feds. I mean, it's going to be pretty simple. The one that's going to take a little more work are the breakwaters and the sand at the end, because the Corps is going to be concerned about it going to the Marina Channel, because that's technically a federal project, and the Corps is responsible. So we have to go through what they call a Section 408.
They haven't shown any money for that federal project in years, but that's besides the point.
Yeah, we have to demonstrate to them that we're not going to increase the financial liability to them by doing our project. And but that's still, I think that's pretty straightforward. The one that would be more difficult to permit is this more advanced. So if we split them in half, yeah, we could pursue them separately for sure.
I think my only concern would be that if you get 1, 2, and with 3, and we've got till 26 to spend this money, and something gets held up, I'd rather do 1 and 2, spend this money before the state takes it back.
I'm sorry. If I didn't explain myself well, that's exactly what I meant. We permit for 1 and 2. We set a permitting process starts for 1 and 2 with a full expectation we're going to spend. It's going to cost us the $4.5 million to do that. But at the same time, we set a separate permit goes in for 3, with the idea that we go top shelf, and we may go second shelf when we finally get there. So, sir.
Just one quick comment that I want the board to be aware of. If there is a permitting effort for, let's say, option 3 here, that results in the permitting of the area that has the most impact, you would incur additional consultant costs for that permitting, because if it takes another year of sub-consultant and prime consultant and permitting costs, you would incur that additional cost. I just wanted to be clear.
So that's a cost-benefit analysis, and we could only make that decision
Absolutely.
after we've had at least a ballpark figure of what that would be.
Absolutely. I just wanted the board to be
No,
aware
thank you.
that you would incur those additional permitting costs over time, because as much as Chris likes us, he probably doesn't want to work for nothing over another year. But anyway, you would incur those costs.
Okay, so as soon as we can get that estimated cost for doing the permitting that way, that would help us in our financial decisions.
Right, yeah, I don't think here's what I would recommend that we do. And we're under contract to do this already, is the pre-application meeting. We get a general read from the board on how you guys want to proceed. And we don't have to lock into anything specific now. You understand the pros and cons of the cost and all these different things. And then we need to go and have our sit down with the agencies, and they all come, from the Corps, from the resource agencies, National Marine Fisheries Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the state, and everybody. We all sit around a table and we talk about this, and we get feedback from them. And then that might help decide the path to go on that. And maybe the feedback is, this is not going to take that long, this is a minor issue, but we're just trying to anticipate, what they're going to say. What's going on?
I could not read the numbers.
At Sunny Point.
I could not read the numbers on the screen for the costs. Are you going to give us that on paper?
Yes, and
Thank you.
It can be printed a PDF, and yeah. Yeah, Dory got it kind of late on Friday, so I was scrambling to get it to you. Sorry about that.
Chris, I have just a practical question about the design in option B. At the end of Atlantic, we have a CAMA access point now.
We talked
to
about
the
that
water.
last time. I knew there was
Right.
an issue there.
And I was just wondering, in our perfect world, when we get that additional $5 million of funding to have Area 3 be the most it could be, is there any reasoning why it couldn't extend to include that CAMA access, which is that whole loop that you're talking about, Rebecca? I used to walk it all the time. Yeah.
You brought that up last time,
Yeah.
and when I was doing this, I was like, there's an issue down here, and I can't remember what it is exactly right now, but I thought it was more important to have this conversation. But of course, it can absolutely be adjusted, and I think there was a private, at some point you bump into a private parcel down there. And so we haven't done that level of analysis to know exactly where to end that, but it's definitely something that can be done should be pretty straightforward.
Are you like the beach?
I'm thinking long-term, 50 years, what are we doing here? And I've been here not as long as Mark, but I've had my house 26 years. And I remember walking in Moore Beach and walking all across in front of Waterfront Park, all of that stuff. So I think to be able to have sand there would be a real community asset for the future, for connectivity and recreation.
I think should we talk about this in sections perhaps? So that way we can break down what we think in each section. So let's talk about section A, which is on the far side, on the west side. That's, I guess, from where American Fish is to just the other side of the pump station there. Is that, am I? That's right. Area 1. Yeah, that area 1.
Mm-hmm. That goes, yeah, it would completely cover the Coors revetment too, area 1.
So go ahead, Mark.
Just before you, I'm with you. Which one of these three, 1, 2, or 3, needs the most? Which section do we really need to be addressing first? Not how easy it will be. Which one really needs the money first?
Do you want me to answer, you're going to ask a question? You want me to answer the question before you? The most vulnerable is area 1. I mean, mainly because you've already had to treat the road. You're fighting a battle down there, and it's not over yet. Those rocks, the problem is going to continue to propagate away from those rocks. You're going to have an end effect off those rocks, and so areas 1 and 2 are the most critical from a shore protection perspective. There's no question, because right here, I mean, you're protected here. It's not perfect, but it's protected. You're not perfect down there. And, I understand the access issue in front of that wooden bulkhead. I just think it's just going to be really difficult to do a nice sand beach seaward of that wooden bulkhead, just because the whole shoreline has retreated so far landward. And one thing we haven't talked about, and we just don't understand it, is this bend in the river migrating toward you? We don't know that. It could be. And so... like it's a meander of the river. Here, sorry, close your eyes if this makes you dizzy. Go all the way back. So when rivers turn, they have an outside of the bend and an inside of the bend, and on the inside of the bend, it typically shoals and gets shallower. On the outside of the bend, it's erosional and deep. And these things will, in time, migrate. And it's possible this thing has been gradually migrating toward you for decades, centuries. I don't know how long it's been. And these changes that the Corps, I'm really going out on a limb here, but the dredging could have impacted that. And there's no way you would ever know. And we don't know that that's happening or not. That's what scares me, though, about really pushing these structures right to the edge of this thing. And it would be terrible to put it out there on the edge and these foundations collapse and these things roll off into deep water. And so that is a concern, because particularly in Area 3, and that's why it's so expensive, because we're being really aggressive with trying to stabilize the foundation and prepare for the worst, because that is some of your design conditions are most severe in Area 3. So but you are dealing with some pretty significant problems in areas 2. With the wooden bulkhead, and the access to that area, I know it's really a low tide access condition. You can go out there at low tide. It would eliminate access along shore there, even at low tide.
And I do think that section is probably less significant than the further east section from the pier over to this area. So if we're talking about that Canna access down here at that park as well, and I don't know if that's exactly where that access is, but I kind of assume that it is, then we'll still have sort of a loop along the water, with the exclusion of the part at Waterfront Park where you get up and you walk along the sidewalk there at Waterfront Park.
Yeah, I think reasonable objectives right now with the money that you have, let's assume you never get another dollar. treating areas 1 and 2 and trying to improve the conditions there is probably a good plan. You may not, and if prices come in, you can see how we've developed the cost. If prices come in better than what you may end up with a little extra leftover money. I don't think you're going to end up with $2 million left over, but this is right on the edge of your budget, and so you might not spend it all if you got really good prices. However, you may spend more. We just don't, and that's part of the bid process, right? Once we get there, this I can't think is really helps guide the decision making on what are your priorities at this point.
So for the option A and option B, really, area 1 and area 2 are the same. The only
That's correct.
option is area 3.
That's correct. That's the way we've done it right now. And we could go back and do an option C and add what the cost is to put the structures back in front of area 2. Given the grant amount right now, that we were really focusing on how can you spend this money right now. And even if you put a revetment in front of area 2, if you got won the lottery and got $20 million or $15 million in the future, it wouldn't prevent you from doing something in front of that revetment in the future. If that's something you wanted to do.
That answers my question on that, thank you.
But the option is not in its entirety. So option A is 3 parts, but we can do 2 parts.
That's right.
So I think we really just need to focus. We can all agree that 1 and 2 need to be done. Let's agree and let him get back to work.
And empower him to have the discussion in the pre-meeting about Area 3 and just what all.
Absolutely. We're going to talk about we're going to talk about the big picture with them. We're going to step back, and I'm going to give back further than this with them. We've done it before, probably new people there by now. We're going to talk about the big picture. We're going to talk about the available funding. We're going to talk about the future goals, and we're going to talk about, we need to get feedback from them on how best to do this from a regulatory perspective. And time is another concern, right? You've got a fuse on this money. You need to spend it. We need to help this community spend this money. How can we get to that finish line the fastest?
So I'm not a lot familiar with this, but I'm going to circle back to one of my original conversations is about the people who own the right-of-way on the land. And how soon can we get that part of the process in action? One person could hold this up if we have to go to court, if they don't agree to it. So my concern is we could do all this good stuff, move forward, and one person decides they don't want to play in the game. We'll have to take them to court, yada, yada, and that could drag this out for quite some time.
I think we'd be entitled to eminent domain acquisition without going to
Well,
court.
that's additional cost. So whatever that is, all of that legal stuff that has to take place, I just want to make sure that we don't lose track that as soon as your conversations take place, the city starts that conversation with the landowners, because if they all say good to go, then that's fine. But if somebody says no, then we need to figure out what's our strategy.
In my opinion, you can start that conversation now. I mean, if the agreed upon concept is to restore and stabilize Area 1, that's really not going to change. Honestly, I think that's a pretty straightforward solution for that area. And so the buy-in from those owners would have to be, are you okay with this concept?
I'm good with however legally we do it, but the quicker the better.
It's definitely going to have legal interaction. I mean, I'm not a lawyer. So identify those property owners, to have one-on-one sit-downs with them, talk about the plan. I can be available on a cost-effective, from a Zoom perspective, if some technical input needs to, we can have a Zoom meeting with them, or at least the community start, or I can provide enough information to support, a conversation at the staff level, or, if there's an attorney, whoever's involved with those people. Public outreach is important, and, stakeholder engagement is important, even citywide for something like this. And so, I don't see why we would have to wait for the regulatory agencies.
Okay. I'm just looking at risk management. I'm assuming this is all going to go very smoothly because it's to their, in my humble
it never
opinion,
does.
it's to their benefit to do this. Otherwise, their house could wash away along with Bay Street, but that's besides the point. We never know what another human being is going to think. Robert?
What are
Well,
the, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, my question is to Ms. Bonnie is, how did we handle this with the small job that we just recently did? Did we have any pushback from, I know we had pushback from one person who, I don't think we put anything on their property, is that?
That's correct, you know, and you were, I mean, he came and talked to you guys, but when push came to shove, he did not end up doing an actual appeal, a written appeal. But yeah, you could definitely, I mean, you know, everybody has a different interpretation, you know, and looks at a plan and goes, oh my God, but you're going to make it worse for me, whether it's true or not, they, you know, they start panicking, but.
Do we have any type of legal opinion from Brady about what rights these people have on those water skirt lots?
I thought we did. If not, I can certainly get it, but I thought we had something.
Earlier on, I believe it was probably later last year, we did approach the city attorney with the possibility that these properties would be impacted and how and what exactly their riparian rights were and how the city could work with those property owners. He did render some opinions, and I think they were rather lengthy, his response, and they were presented to the board last year. But our city attorney is aware of the issue and has read up on the issue, so it's not going to take him long to get back up to speed with what we're doing. We're not starting from square one with him. So again, based on what the board determines today, we'll start the wheels moving with approaching those property owners with our proposed alternative for protection of the shoreline. So he is aware and has rendered an opinion. I don't have that with me right now, but.
I'll try to find it and get it back to everybody.
So I am of the opinion that we should move forward with 1 and 2, and then we should maybe discuss what our options are and what the opinions are for section 3. Does that?
So for this event, for today, we're not doing a vote, is that correct? We're looking for a consensus?
Yes, they need to have some kind of direction in order to keep moving along to our
But
deadline.
am I, or are we prevented from actual voting, or are we looking for consensus?
No, Dory, I think they could vote, right? Yes, you can do a motion and vote.
Okay. So are you making a motion, ma'am?
I move that we allow Chris Creed and Olson and Associates to move forward with the plan for section 1 and 2 as stated, and I guess, and continue discussion on section 3, area 3.
Second.
All right, there's been a motion and a second. Discussion.
Well, would we not at this point want the most it could be, which I'm guessing is option B, for him to empower him to have those discussions? And obviously, I agree that our focus for this $5 million is 1 and 2, but then empower him to continue to bring us back option 3 and 4 information, right?
I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So
For option B, yeah.
So move forward with option A as it stands, and with the plan to do option B in the future? Is that what I'm?
No, option A has different things in it. It's just section 1 and 2. And then it's really moved forward with option B, focused on spending the $5 million
On 1
for
and 2.
section 1 and 2. Is,
I think that, yes, that makes,
so if,
so do I need to amend the motion to pursue option B with the focus on area 1 and 2 in the short term with the potential to move forward with area 3 in the future?
Second.
So we have the motion and we have the second.
Can I have a comment?
And now we have discussion from our
Well,
SME.
I didn't know if this is appropriate or not, but I wanted to make a point about Area 4. We need to discuss that area, even if it's not going to be a town. if you want that included in the permit or not. But we will have that conversation with them. But if that's not a priority right now, that could definitely be something that can completely be done independent.
Is that included in the cost of the permitting? Or is that an additional cost to permit Area 4? I mean, are we talking nominal? Is like
Yeah, it's
a
nominal.
couple
I
$1,000s?
mean,
Or are we talking an additional 20 grand to do permitting for?
We would definitely figure that out. We can let you know back, but I don't think it's going to be that much. It's going to be a little bit of engineering and some drawings. I don't think there's as big of an environmental issue up there as it will be with the sturgeon issue. But in our meeting with them, we will have a conversation about Area 4, and if you don't need any direction on Area 4 right now, we'll definitely can get you some feedback on Area 4.
I think that makes sense.
Okay.
Dorothy,
my question.
do you have that? Okay.
My question, we mentioned private property owners in Section 4 as an issue about why not to move forward with Section 4. Is that right? Is that what I've heard in the past?
You have, but if I'm understanding the motion, it is to move forward with looking at the permit process for that and making no decision whether you're going to actually do 4.
Well, yeah, I understand that, but we are moving forward with protecting private property in areas 1 and 2.
We are, but we're looking at that because there's a critical need so that Bay Street doesn't wash away. In my mind, that's how I look at it. My problem is are we going to go and do the same shoreline restoration for the landing?
Well, I think that's my question, is I am totally in favor of doing whatever we have to along Bay. We already got, that work done last year. So I just don't want to be sitting here at the table and hear people say private property rights later when we try to do something in 4 that they certainly were able to overcome in 1 and 2.
Yeah, Robert, I think that's a great point, but I think that when we're looking at our infrastructure for the city, when we're talking about our roads and sidewalks that are in place and potentially going to be washed away if we don't move forward, then that's a different conversation than someone's private bulkhead that they have in front of their home.
There's no direct city impact in a good hunk of 4. There's only a personal property thing, and if we're going to do that, then the argument could be made that we should need to go the entire city line all the way down to past the landing to do everybody. So that's the argument that's there.
I think just for our purposes, though, to get him to look at option B, everything within option B, because he's going to have those pre-discussions, and 3 and 4 will come back to us. Is that sort of my understanding of your motion?
Yes.
Several property owners along the shoreline have said that they would be interested in, even if we didn't buy the material, that they would buy, if it was barged. If we had the barge, they would buy the material. And so we have a public-private partnership. And I don't know how many of them will be willing to do that, but we need to be open to that.
And
does that permitting of allowing us to put a revetment on the Section 4, where it's mostly marshland, tidal marsh, is that going to be a difficult?
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend a revetment like we're talking about in Area 2. I would talk about those little small, called sills, S-I-L-L-S, seaward of the grass, so that the grass establishes. And so that's that living shoreline approach is Area 4, which makes the most sense because it's highly successful at the far eastern end and just extend that all the way through. Now, you're going to have to get person-to-person buy-in, but if I were one of the owners down there and I saw what's happening just down the street, I was like, wow, that works pretty good. I would want to do that. But, everybody's got their own angle. But, yeah, but you would permit it as a whole. It could be held as a permit by the city and implement it as a project should you get a group of the private owners that want to do it. And it would, sometimes it is better to permit more than you think you might do, because to go back and do it piecemeal is very difficult and costly, as Bob mentioned, so.
Okay, so, Ms. Dutton, could you repeat what we think we're doing?
I have Alderman Kelly, move forward that we allow Chris Creed and Olson to move forward with option B, areas 1 and 2 as presented, and continue the discussion of area 3. And 4. And 4, that's the next paragraph.
And, sir, with that language, is that clear in your head as to what we're asking? Yes, sir. Okay. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. All right, so we have a motion on the floor. We have a second to that. Is there any more discussion? All in favor of that motion, please say aye and raise your hand. Aye. Any opposed? It goes unanimous. Thank you very much. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. I'm going to ask for a 5-minute recess and before we start the next topic. I'd like to bring the meeting back into order, and I'm going to ask for I will entertain a motion on a personnel issue, which will require us to go into closed session at the end of this meeting, And it is to consider the qualifications, competence, performance, character, fitness, conditions of appointment, or conditions of initial employment of any individual public officer, employee, or prospective public officer, employee, or to hear, investigate a complaint, charge, or grievance by or against an individual public officer or employee. General professional policy issues may not be considered in a closed session. A public body may not consider the qualifications, competence, performance, character, fitness, appointment, or removal of a member of the public body or another public body may not be considered or fill a vacancy among its own membership except in an open meeting. Final action making an appointment or discharge or removal of a public body having final authority for the appointment or discharge or removal shall be taken in an open meeting. So what that means is we go into closed session. If we make any decision, we have to come out and go into public section and do that. But this is more informational, and this is time sensitive, which is why I'm asking for it to be done now.
So moved.
We have a motion, we have a second. Is there any discussion? All in favor say aye. Any opposed? Unanimous. Thank you very much. So, we're now into item F agenda, which is a discussion of a possible UDO changes. And I'm looking for my copy of it. I'm sorry, ma'am. No, I have it here somewhere. Here it is, UDO changes. Were you planning to lead this, or do you want me to do this?
No, actually, no, there really isn't anything from the staff. It's up to all of you to give what your suggestions are, if you want to add or delete from the list that was already given to us. And then if there's specific questions, Dory can assist us with that.
So for the board, we were in our package is the UDO text amendments that were gathered at this point. Is there any questions about those particular UDO requests, or is there additional ones that upon reflection you may want to add to this so we can move forward with the staff?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do have a few that I would like to add to the list. Create a gateway entry corridor overlay district. That has been talked about before, and to have that added in to the list of conversations for the planning board. Also, a review of the 311, the building design standards, and look at that section for potential updates. And then I think that's it for now. I could speak in favor of something within it, but.
So these were generated, the ones we have in front of us are generated just by email. This does not require a vote. Could I just ask you to send the clerk the hard copy of the electrons of that, please? Okay. Any other thoughts or additions at this point?
Are we going to look through them, or?
Well, I thought once we get the whole package together, we'll have to come back and have another conversation about that. And eventually, yes, we'll have to have some kind of vote. And Alderman Marcel, you are more knowledgeable than I. I'm assuming that what happens here is if we have a laundry list of things that we want to consider, we then first send it to the planning board for their review, and then they send it back to us with their recommendations, whatever they may be.
They would start that process for sure. This is a lot of text amendments and different things. You would want to have all your planners hired, and so this is a lot.
It is, and we may, in our conversations, break it into segments, because some of this I don't think is as complicated as others. And so we may want to think about, I would ask the board to think about how we might break it into two different sets of priorities. One is like, we really need to get this done, but it's going to take us a while, but this is my top priority. And the other one is, it's generally probably going to be a pretty easy sell, and we can get it done relatively quickly. So we'll set another date to come back to have that finalized, but if once the clerk gets the final list, we'll move forward. Any other discussion on this topic? Okay, with that, we'll move on to the next agenda item. And the next agenda item is a discussion on the role of the board liaisons. Robert, would you like to start that, or would you like me to start that, or how would you like to do that?
Or would you like me to start it?
I'll punt to you, ma'am.
During the Rules and Procedures Committee, it was discussed about having something, a written job description for the board member liaisons, and then how to report back to the entire board. And I don't want to speak for the Rules and Procedures Committee meeting, but I think there was a thought that they're not hearing about issues that could come up in the future that the board may want to weigh in on, and then all of a sudden it shows up on a board meeting and the rest of the board knows nothing about it. So and again, I don't want to speak for the rest of them, but that's kind of what started this happening.
Yeah, I think that's well put. I think one of the things that was a goal, and I believe I'm speaking for the group, one of the goals was to create consistency about how individual members that are liaisons to boards get information back to the board, the entire board. And some things may be more important for the entire board to hear sooner than waiting 30 days to the next meeting. So it was really with the idea of consistency about how information is brought back was one of the topics we discussed.
Frank, your thoughts?
I pretty much agree with exactly what Robert has said. We're talking about consistency, timing, getting it back, having a certain format that we follow, and that certain things we kind of prioritize them a little bit too. Stuff coming back from the planning board, maybe the Board of Adjustment, that has a lot more effect than some of the other ones. So that stuff really needs to get back to us very quickly in a timely manner and a pretty concise summary of what happened.
I'm sorry. Well, the only other or part of this conversation went into the role of the liaison in the meetings themselves. So, when I was appointed to the HPC, with the exception of maybe two other people on this board, I had more knowledge than anybody that was being appointed to that committee. Since then, I've had the opportunity to speak during those meetings to clarify things that come from the State Historic Preservation Office or the guidelines and the direction. And so one of our questions was, how much involvement can that liaison have? Because we could, steer the conversation in our narrative, in our direction, or we could just be giving facts, which are, so that was part of the conversation as well.
So I think this document does a pretty good job of documenting that concept. In other words, if the liaison sees that there's a legal or a technical issue that's being out there, they're not prevented from talking about that. And then there's the perception by some that, or let me backtrack on that. When I got first elected as an alderman, I asked, so what do the liaisons do? And I was giving an oral description of that. But then I actually asked the city clerk about that, can you show me where it's written? And there was nothing written about anything. on what the liaisons did. There was oral history, so part of this conversation that the three of us had in the ad hoc committee was, how do we show that the liaison is not there to run the meeting or to direct the conversation, other than to put the train back on the tracks every so often if we saw it going off the tracks. And that's a delicate balance of how to do that. So I thought this was pretty well written on how we do that. And so that brought us to today about that. So go ahead,
I think
Robert.
this is, you know, I hear the way Karen and I will often talk about how her onboarding and my onboarding was very different, and I'm jealous. You know, she got put in a car and shown city assets and all of these things, and when we came on board, we really didn't, I didn't get to experience that as in the same way. So I think that this is part of how do we make the future boards, you know, the future elected officials, bring them up to speed day one, so that 6 months in, they're not trying to figure out, is that a city asset or is this the direction? How do I participate in the conversations and things like that? This is one part of a bigger picture that we're trying to prepare future.
I have a question. Are we envisioning this as applying to the committees as well as the regulatory boards? Because, you know, we've got two quasi-judicials, and the planning board is not one of them, but they're regulatory. And then you have the cemetery committee, the beautification committee, and so on. And I know that liaisons to the beautification tend to get out there and dig and weed and be part of what's going on. And I believe the beautification committee has a board, right? In addition to all the members, is that correct? Or is
No.
it just a board?
It's
Okay.
a board. And oddly, you should say all that, because I do think that there is a difference. I had a lot of issues with the document, just look for, and I don't know if we want to go item by item on it if you're trying to craft the language now. But one of the things that Lo pointed out is that with the planning board and Frank too, with the planning board and the Board of Adjustment, those are wholly different conversations. We have in ordinance the duties or the responsibilities and the scope of liaisons with regard to the Parks and Recs Committee, with regard to forestry, with regard to beautification and cemetery, for example, that allows the board liaison to participate in the meeting, but not to vote, not to hold office, and a third thing. So I think those are sort of different conversations. Like Lo said, I go to the cleanups, I prune with the forestry committee, I do things, so I'm a little bit more, but I think our ethics, and one of the things I'd like to pull in is, you know, our ethics say that we do not individually as members of the board speak for the board as a whole. And I think one of the things that's getting lost in this document is how much staff administers to these committees. The staff liaison manages their budget, manages their regulations, does the notices for their meetings and all of that, so that for us to, I noticed in one of the things it said, for us to, the board liaisons to speak up about open meeting laws and all of those things, that staff is really managing that for them, just like we depend on the clerk to manage us. Then, you know, I as a liaison, I wouldn't want or the responsibility of doing that. I would hope that would be a staff conversation.
I'm not, certainly this is not addressing the staff, this is addressing the Board of Aldermen. And so my question is, if you're the liaison to the Parks and Rec, as an example, do you get to have full conversations whenever you want to in that conversation, which can drive the conversation, or do you still fall under the rules of, if you're in the planning board, which is that you don't drive that conversation? You're there and you can talk about those things that are documented here. But how much, if I'm on the forestry committee, there's nothing that says you can't go out and prune bushes or look at trees or help drive up and look to see which oak trees we're going to buy and bring them back down. There's nothing in here that would prevent you from doing any of that stuff. I think the crux of, and Frank, please, and Robert, please correct me if I'm wrong here, the crux of this whole thing was how much can you, the liaison, drive the train in any of those things?
Yeah, and I think about that. I mean, you know, and I go back to historic preservation. If I don't like a turquoise house, not that there are any that exist in town right now, but if I don't like that, I certainly could have driven that conversation about color in those meetings. But we know that's not the best path forward.
So what I'm feeling, two different committees, two different experiences with the adjustment and with the cemetery committee. Board of Adjustment, I sit off to the side. I'm not recognized. I don't really talk about anything. Listen, observe, even though I don't like things. On the cemetery committee, they almost demand that I sit at the table with them and talk the whole time. And if I don't, it sometimes falls where they don't know where to go. So I don't want to influence them. I need independence because I have to make a decision later. So I don't want to be influencing them. I don't want to be at the table. I suggest we don't sit at the table when these meetings are happening. Make it official. You don't sit at the table. You're not recognized. You're just there to observe, and unless a necessity.
Yeah, my experience, well, Beck and I are on the planning board, and I'm also on the ABC board. Planning board, I just kind of sit back there and take notes. ABC board, I sit there, and at the end, they will say, do you have any comments? So at that point in time, I'm allowed to add something if I have something relevant to add to it. But with the planning board, I just sit there and write. Influence in no manner, shape, or form.
And I think, Karen, I think you're onto something about the kind of two different kinds of committees that we work with. To Frank's point, at the planning board, we sit in the back and pay attention, and you know, we bring something back to the board if we need to. But for 4th of July Festival Committee, I sit at the table, and so does the representative from Oak Island. So if we remove ourselves from the table, then Oak Island gets a say in what's happening in Southport, but Southport doesn't. So that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me.
But the 4th of July is not a city committee.
I am the liaison to the city committee.
But she is a liaison, and she needs to know what her role is.
Yeah, I guess one of my questions, Rebecca, is that we have city staff that's assigned to this thing too.
Right.
Yes, there's also city staff in the meeting.
And are they the person or persons who should be working on that? I'm not sure how, I understand exactly what you're saying, because they're, I don't know how to do that split there, where are we going to list, and I'm not saying we can't do this, do we list committees that you're allowed to speak at and drive the train? If you're telling
Well,
them
they're
what.
very different. I mean, regulatory versus just
I don't care.
advisory.
It's a budget process. All this stuff comes back to budget. If I'm sitting in a committee that the city has to run whatever it is, beautification, I don't care what it is, and I can drive the train, my train, Rich Alt's train, into that committee, because you can do that, okay? You can figure out how to use the right words to get, in many cases, people to go down your track. And I thought the idea of the committees was to get an independent third-party review of things, to bring that to us, those ideas to us, and that this board then makes a decision if there has to be a decision. Or if a group is going to say, we're going to ask for this much money in a budget year, the liaison brings that back to us, explains that to all of us, why they're thinking of that. I don't get that now. I don't get any review from anybody about what these different groups are doing and why they're asking for money until I get into the middle of the budget cycle and there's a dollar figure there. I'm not sure why we give $3,000 of this and it's not $5,000. I don't know any of that information when I go into those processes. So part of that is that sheet of paper that's attached to your thing is your responsibility to kind of give us a heads up of what's going on. It's subjective, I understand that, but they're all good people and all smart people here. You'll figure out most of it and get back to us. And then the other part is, how do you limit driving the train? And this is an attempt at that. If there's a better way, I'm all for it.
It seems to me, though, that the staff assigned to a board and a committee are the ones that bring forth the budget recommendations for us to consider. And then, of course, at budget discussion time, we go into all the nitty-gritty of that. The purpose, it seems to me, is twofold here. First, to define and limit the amount of influence that a liaison can have, and second, the extent to which we expect a liaison to inform the Board of Aldermen.
That's
And
the way I look-
I
that's the way I
repeat,
look
I
at
think it's very important to differentiate between boards and committees. The committees have no power at all. They do not make decisions on their own, and two of them are quasi-judicial.
Then why
there's the
are we putting
committees that just
liaisons
do
on it?
them. What?
Why would we put liaisons on any of them if you're not held to the same level of responsibility of reporting back to this board about what's going on? And regardless of who's the mayor, is the mayor putting you on to drive the train for these different committees? I can clearly, and any person sitting in this chair can clearly do that, I can figure out who is in like mind of me and put you on the committee if the idea is I want to drive the train. And that, I don't think, is the appropriate fashion. I think the liaison there is to make sure we don't go off the tracks, report back, but let the committee work out whatever their recommendation is without the liaison telling them what I think we should do, and we should do it this way. And I've seen that happen.
Well,
I
then,
think part
you know-
of this is taking the politics out of the committees and the boards. You know, leaving the politics at this table, and I think that's the goal, is to leave the politics out of these boards that are ultimately making recommendations and suggestions to us.
Well, I'm in the 5th year as a liaison to something. And I've seen it as my role to do several things. One, make sure that the committee knows what the latest thinking and discussions by the Board of Aldermen have been. I know several times we've talked about the need for minutes from all boards and committees on time, and that, and to continue to urge that they do that. Talking about open meetings law, keeping them up to date on that. And one of the things I've done is tell the committee what people have asked me about what the committee is doing and asking for information that only that committee can provide. So just letting people know, people on the committee know that there are questions, that there are concerns, and so on. And then leave it to the committee to discuss and make decisions.
I would like to state for the record that I am not going to be the person that keeps us out of jail. Keeps us out of jail. I'm not here to, I don't look at my role as someone who is going to keep us, in line with open meetings laws. We have staff for that. I rely on staff. I want y'all to know I rely on y'all. And so, and we have a chair of each of those boards who, should have gone through some training or taken the initiative to learn those things. So as a liaison, I think, yes, we can keep the train on the tracks, but what I think the mayor's trying to say is don't direct the train, and there's certain things that I don't want to be the responsibility for, and telling them when they're out of line with regards to open meeting laws or any other legalities, I don't see that as my role.
Alderman Lay.
If you take a look at it, you've got committees, you've got boards, and the committees, you may be the most knowledgeable person there, and you can direct and you can, input and whatnot. But stuff like the planning board, you don't want to do anything to even try to influence them in any manner, shape, or form. They're doing something they're going to get back to us. And I see my role there as just sitting there, listening, taking notes. And if we see something pertinent, getting that back to us as a board.
I'm going to use the forestry just as an example. I do not recall the board giving direction to the committee person to go forth with any kind of, this is what the board thinks, except perhaps we have consistently said, go out and buy oak trees. We go out and buy oak trees, and we give you $3,000 or whatever we give you to go do that. That's about the only thing I know that this board has ever said to the forestry committee we would like you to, this is our mandate because we set policy. So if the conversation that the liaison is communicating back and forth what the board thinks, we don't do that in practice. We just don't do that. I don't remember ever having a conversation with anybody who's on the Parks and Rec Committee about what we think the majority of this board, thinks they should be doing until it gets into basically budget time. I think that should be something we do. In fact, it's written here that if you're the liaison and you say, listen, they're going down this road here, should we give them advice on that? We collectively should give them advice on that. We as a board, as opposed to we as in Rich Alt gives them advice on something. That's what I think one of the things we're trying to goals here is to say, right now the liaisons, because the universe hates a vacuum, the liaisons have been filling that, but it's coming out of their head, their exclusive head, as opposed to a collective head. This is a more complicated process, I understand that, But there's not that many, certainly for the committees, the regular committees. There's no huge number of major projects that we have to have a conversation about going on any particular time. It's not time consuming, is it?
You know, last year, we passed an ordinance designed to standardize and unify how the boards and committees elect or select recommend to us new members, how they appoint officers, and the timeline for all of this. And, you know, I've seen it as part of my role as a liaison to remind the committee where I'm assigned, look, April is when we're taking applications. May, you've got to get your
But that's not a,
decisions
that's
in.
not a policy.
No,
You're
but
still,
it's,
under
it's
this, you're
like
still,
informing about the law that we passed, which seemed to surprise some of the committee members.
well, it certainly has surprised one committee that has deviated from that already. And so they're going to have to go back in June and do it again. That's just what happens as we go through this process. But what you're talking about is not driving it is driving a policy in the sense that they have to do that. But you're keeping them on the tracks. The staff should be keeping them on the tracks. Robert makes a good point that maybe our chairmen have to come in and have a class about what their obligations are and how they keep it on the tracks. Because I don't know that we give anybody any training. The groups elect their own person, and we expect them to be knowledgeable on all this stuff. And heck, we're not even knowledgeable on all this stuff. So maybe part of, it's not part of this policy because it's governing us, maybe part of the policy that another policy is either a yearly training or when you get elected to be the chairman, we bring you in. That should be a policy, I think Robert's right on that, to teach these people, this is not, the aldermen have set policy that says you will do X, Y, and Z. So you need to do X, Y, and Z. Whether you like putting out the minutes, whether you don't like putting out the minutes, it doesn't make any difference. If you want to be the chairman, that's what you're going to do. And then there's other things that they have powers over. Go ahead, ma'am.
I think it's an excellent idea to plan a training session for chairs, especially new chairs, with the clerk. I think that's an excellent idea. I do think that ordinance exists that says a lot of what you just said, so that the chairs or the committees should have access to this ordinance, and that should be, it says when they're going to do things and the kind of things, and other committees and subcommittees, and all of that is already, it's not for us necessarily to have to remind them, because really and truthfully, the staff liaison, you know, maybe that's a practice where at the beginning of a new board appointment cycle, then they give out, you know, the ordinance relative. I'm sure, I know in the cemetery, Mark, you weren't there with the first meeting, but that was what the staff liaisons did at the first meeting, is give them the ordinance that was related to them, and that gives them sort of their marching orders. So I think you've been at a disadvantage because you've been in a new committee, newly created committee.
And that is a disadvantage because everybody,
Yeah.
there's no
No precedent, no
Correct.
learning curve, everybody's learning together.
So for the cemetery, you're going to have to use your best judgment and to take, let's assume for a minute we pass this. You take this to make it work until you've got them trained up that they understand that they're to make their own decisions. And you're only there to, if they said, listen, we want to know how does the board think about this if we were to vote on this, yada, yada, going down the line. And you come back and talk to us. So this is, we may have other policies and procedures that govern the individual boards and committees, But this is to govern us.
No.
So it's going to be a work in progress for a while, trying to get the balance down between what is the staff member doing, what is the chair supposed to be doing, what are we doing, but we have taken on the roles of a lot of those things where it's not our role. And as we have those conversations, as I watch, I see the liaisons having great influence on some of the boards and committees. And so that influence needs to be balanced out as not your personal preference. It's not, otherwise, the mayor can corrupt the whole damn thing. Because he or she can appoint my guy. I want to influence that group. I'm going to appoint my guys to do that. And that can happen. And I'm trying to figure out how do we make sure that it's all balanced out, that this board, not this chair or any other particular chair, is mutually, collectively driving the train.
Do we need to have some sort of whenever we have a change in the boards and whatnot, do we need to have an educational session, an orientation session where we bring all those committee chairs together and let them know what our role is, how we're going to interact with them, and what we expect and how the interchange is?
I think because by happenstance we changed the rules, they're all changed at the same time. So, you know, they make their appointments to chair and vice chair in June, and maybe every July or the end of June, we just set a date every year that happens. I think that's what Robert was kind of alluding to, and I think that's a terrific idea, is to bring them together so there's less dependence. Why am I echoing? There's less dependence on the liaisons to keep chipping in.
That way they kind of hear an official version of what you are and how we want you to do it and how we're going to interact with you. So there's, you know, got some clarity to it.
Yeah, I think that's a great policy.
So I would entertain a motion now, I'm just talking about that one topic, to instruct the manager to come back with us with some kind of policy that we would vote on, that would happen every end of June and beginning of July, whatever it is, obviously after the 4th of July, that everybody gets together and we have this chat. I don't know that we all have to be there, but whatever configuration the staff comes up with, to educate the chair and vice chair as to what the rules are. So I would entertain that motion.
I'll make that motion, and I think that we just need to make sure that every time the chair or vice chair turns over, that we have some type of orientation with those people. And I'd go so far as to say, you know, we need to do something like that with this board every time it turns over. And we finally are having orientation, you know, which is great. So just something to think about as we move forward.
So is there a second to that?
Second.
There's a motion, there's a second. Is there any further discussion?
Excuse me. Training, required training for these boards, especially planning board and board of adjustment. Required. I don't think we do that. I don't think they've ever had too many training field, you know, going to events, learning, you know, outside of their meetings. I don't think they have had any kind of a training whatsoever.
Brady came last year, was it? Brady came and spoke to the board and the Planning and Zoning Commission, went over all the laws. We didn't do it with the Board of Adjustment, but we did do it with both bodies. I think it was last year.
And in the past, the planning board has had training modular training sessions from the School of Government. So I know those activities have gone on. I think once we get tooled up staff-wise with a complete planning department, I'm hoping that will help that mark. That's,
I guess.
we can't overlearn.
Yeah, and so, and I've certainly full play this. Yeah, we did that training, and then I realized it was 4 years ago, and there's half the staff is gone. So, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to add, the Board of Adjustment has had the virtual trainings before, and I've done training with them as well.
I guess what I'm in my head, and I think that's what the motion is that there's a requirement that every year this is re-looked at. And every year there's training put on there because the years slip by really quickly. And 3 or 4 people, if we didn't have this conversation today on this program as what preceded here, there are 3 people on this board that had never seen it before. And so, or had seen it to this degree. And so we have to keep that in mind. So I think that was the motion to do that, is to have the manager bring this up every year after June, because that's when the people are selected. So if I've got that right.
And you may want to wait till after they're sworn in. They're appointed, I think, in June, so it may be July. So you may want to say after they're sworn in.
Well, and I don't know if this is something we want to consider, but since the new appointments to those boards happen at the same time as the elections for those boards, we could bring the new appointees on and do, so if you're newly appointed, hadn't been on a board before, you could participate in the orientation, or should.
Or anybody could participate.
Yeah, really.
Alderman Spencer, did you have a thought? And you're young. All right, so there's a motion on the floor. Did you get it come to you?
The transition, Ms. Bonnie, you are told to do this, and then you might leave in June. How are we going to transition the knowledge to the next person to make sure they understand every year we want to do this? How do we establish?
Well, I think between the assistant city manager and also myself I'll have an overlap with them. I can just go through everything. I mean, I keep reams of these, things we need to do, so that'll be gone over.
Any other discussion? All in favor of the motion, say aye, please. Aye. Any opposed? Unanimous, thank you. Now we're back to this document. And where do we go with this? So, is there a motion to do anything?
Just continue discussion.
I feel like the idea of reporting back to the board makes a lot of sense, regardless of what the interaction is in the room with the committees and boards. I think that the reporting back piece makes a lot of sense for us, to keep us all informed as to what's going on. But as we discussed earlier, there's a big difference between the different boards and how each of those boards operates. And unless we want to set a policy for each individual board, it's really trying to group them accordingly is going to be very difficult.
Robert, I think my real estate and how we go and we show property, and then after we get done showing property, we get an email that says, what is your feedback? An automatic email that comes to the liaison immediately when the meeting is over. An email that comes to you and says, give us feedback. We submit the feedback. Everyone can see it. I don't know if the public can see it, but we just have that kind of a system where after we're done with a meeting, we get an email that says, all right, Mark, and most of the time I don't reply, but, but with us, you know, we have the opportunity, we're reminded, send in a little bit brief description, and there might be 5 questions, check marks, and any details. Hit the button, and then we've submitted our, so that just.
So the only question I have is, and Mark, you bring this up often about a technology that I'm not sure that we have in this city. If there is no automatic that I know of, somebody has to push a button. Somebody has to write it, push a button. So we have in this document a draft thing of what you're talking about. As we work towards the automaticness of future places, I think it's incumbent upon us to remember that there's form here and they just have to fill it out and send it in. I don't disagree with you, we're just not there yet.
Mark,
Yeah,
we can do that as a Google form too, if you wanted to.
And emails are scheduled all the time. Posts on Facebook are scheduled all the time. You tell it, the email goes out at 6 o'clock, it goes out at 6 o'clock. Done all the time, easy. They can handle that.
You can set a calendar reminder for yourself too.
Sure. Yeah. I like the automation that Mark's talking about. I am sitting close to Alderman Mosteller, and I see a lot of highlighted areas on this document, and I haven't talked to her about the document. I don't know if we want to address these one at a time, or I don't know. I don't even know if you want to address them, but before we do anything, let's get that out.
Well, I think we're not talking about the lion's share of the document, right, Rebecca? We're talking about just the reporting back piece of it. So I'm good to not talk about the rest of this if this is the only thing we're entertaining today. My question is a couple of things, or I can talk about the whole document. I mean, but with regard to reporting back, the planning board does minutes, so I'm not sure, other than an agenda, what would you be reporting back? And then I'm thinking about forestry is what I'm thinking, and what I'm going to be reporting back. And I would probably just be sending the forestry agenda to everybody, but we have to be really careful not to respond or interact or have any dialogue about it, because we'll be in violation of open meeting laws. And everything we write and email is public record. So I just want to make sure.
I guess my question about the minutes is the minutes are 30, 45 days later. We don't get them. We don't get them in and that's just a product of things that are going on. I'm not casting aspersions here, but in my mind, it was, I just met with the Board of Adjustment. They had a lengthy debate about whether or not you can back onto roadways. They voted to allow this guy to have a back out into the roadway process. We in the past have said that's not good. Here's an interesting point we may want to consider in the future.
Or maybe it was a quick meeting and there wasn't a whole lot that happened, and I was there for it. You know, I mean, and it could be as simple as that, just to let everybody know that they met because they were obligated to meet. There was nothing of real substance to report back, and maybe that's the report. But at the same time, maybe, you know, during 4th of July festival, when we were talking about going along Bay Street for the craft vendors rather than pocket parks for the craft vendors, that's something that I brought to the meeting and shared with you guys. But it very easily could have been something that I could have reported back after the meeting. Hey guys, this is what they're looking at doing, just so you know, with Franklin Square Park closed, we're looking at other options still.
So I guess one of the questions we need to answer is there a need to define, from the rest of the board, to define the roles and responsibilities of board liaisons? And if the consensus is yes, then how can we make the document that we have now better if it's not what you want?
I think it's simpler than this document, because I think a lot of this document was addressing staff roles and stuff rather than our roles in it. Because our roles are very simple. We facilitate, if asked a question, like Lo said. I mean, Lo pretty much summed up the different participation that we have, and certainly in the ones I'm involved with. And they, at the end, ask if I have anything, and then I do or I don't, kind of thing, which is usually no. But then we can facilitate, like an event, I knew somebody that they wanted to contact, so I was able to facilitate. So there are things we can help with like that, but I certainly agree that we're not the driver of the conversation. That they have a whole structure for that, and they organize their meeting, and the chair, and they have public comment. They have all of these opportunities for citizens to participate. So,
well, I guess as you get either established or new board members, as they come in, and you're trying to figure out, what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to know enough to go to look up what the chairman of the board of the planning board is supposed to do? Is that my responsibility? Or is my responsibility to go look up what I'm supposed to do if I happen to get put at that committee? So the having duplication of stuff, to me, is not a problem. That's fine. So once again, the concept here was to put us on notice what we're supposed to do, and by extrapolation, you can figure out how you may be able to help the board understand what they're supposed to do.
So to answer the question I asked, I do think it's important that we have roles and responsibilities documented for board liaisons, so that the next time someone's appointed to a board or a committee, you can serve them, at the same time that you appoint them.
I'd like to suggest that before we do make a decision today, that each of us forward to the ad hoc committee our questions and suggestions and concerns, and let the ad hoc committee review that and come up with a final document for us to look at and see if this properly defines what we should be doing and not doing.
So, that's okay. The object is to get this done. So, by looking at your faces, I don't see any grimace over that idea. So, I think that may be a wonderful idea. It's incumbent on all of you.
Say that again.
I
He hasn't really said anything yet.
No, but
He
she's
said
trying to.
it was a wonderful idea. I wanted to hear that again.
It happens so rarely, yes, please put down the date.
Lo would like that verbatim in the minutes.
So if all of you would please take a few minutes in the next couple of days to send to the board, and it's Frank and myself and Robert, what your thoughts are on this topic, so we can put it into the blender and try to come up with something so that we can better address the idea.
Who's chairing that board? If we could send, so we're not doing too much open meeting law conversation. I'll send it to you.
Just send it to me, and I'll make sure
Get me
the
a copy too. 'cause
Copy you on it.
I'm
Yeah.
your liaison.
All right. Any other issues on that particular topic?
The only thing I would say too, as we're thinking about this, with the planning board and the Board of Adjustment, because of the legalities involved with them, we just want to be really clear about how we treat any conversation about, if we're going to do this, send in something, because we're held to a certain standard when things come to us. And so you don't want to give the appearance of it, you having an opinion.
We may have to run that through our attorney to make sure, especially for the Board of Adjustment, because of the semi-judicial language of it, but we'll make that part of the process to make sure that we're not we at least have a legal review of it. All right, I'm going to move on to the next one, which is the awarding of the Franklin Square Park arborist.
Yes, we had gone out to bid, as the board had asked us to do, to get those trees down that Bartlett had recommended we get down at Franklin Square. We did receive one bid. That was from one of the companies that Everett Jones had recommended to us. That's J&D Tree Pros, in the amount of $44,000 to take care of getting all that done. If awarded, they could start, depending on weather, obviously, sometime mid-April, which is what, next week? And it will take them 3 days to get everything done. On another note, I just this morning received the proposal from Bartlett to do the cabling and all of that you had also requested to be done in the pruning. So you had given us $50,000 to do all the work. The removal is $44,000, and then Mr. Jones's proposal for Bartlett is $16,000, so I don't have all the money. So if you want to move forward with the removal, then I will come back to you in May for whatever the gap is to get the cabling and pruning and all of that.
Is there money in this in the current budget to accommodate?
The additional?
Yes.
No, I just asked Heather and Tom, and they said no. So I would just come back, and you probably could take it out of, again, capital. And you would have 6,000 left of the original 50, so I'd need an additional 10.
Bonnie, one of the things I noticed is this is for the removal of 7 trees. So I just want us to recognize that, which is something contrary to what we had said, which is fine. No, I have to tell you, Alderman Spencer, I really agree with the point you made about going ahead and removing the trees so that we can then plant. And we have a clean slate for whatever we're doing in the park and all that. The other one was one that's a hazard. My understanding is that's a hazard over the fire annex. Is that probably for whatever reason should have been included and wasn't, Bonnie?
Yeah, and I can try to work with them because, like you mentioned, I forgot about that then could make up the difference of what we need for the pruning if I can get that done.
Well, and the other thing is, I believe if we do all of these trees, then Bartlett I think a couple of those trees were going to have to be cabled. I think that if we take them, then that may alter that bid. So I'm just wanting us to make sure we know what we're discussing.
Yeah, and if it ends up that I don't need the money, then obviously you won't see it on your agenda.
I was under the impression that after considerable discussion, we had decided only 4 trees and that the others would be cabled, pruned, and hopefully saved. So I'd prefer to go with 4.
My recollection was 4 trees, but I don't know how we got to 7, so.
Because I had them do the estimate on purpose so that we'd have it for the future. So in other words, while they're there, I might as well get the price for everything that had been requested.
It won't be the same price because he gave us a $10,000 discount based on the volume. If they come back with a crane, all of this is staging. It would likely be closer to a price of this magnitude.
If there's a chance to save those 3 trees, I'd much rather we take that chance. What is the cost of just 4 trees?
I would have to go back to them and ask that.
I will tell you this, as forestry liaison, that I did ask the chair about this. Bonnie, and I don't know, I believe you had communication. He mentioned that you had communication with him about removing all of these trees.
Yes. And I had talked about that, and he felt it should be something that is done.
Everything.
But I can work with Mr. Jones, from Bartlett, and then J and D tree pros to see if we can come to a compromise.
So you go ahead and approve the motion as written and then come back or not come back with additional monies later?
Correct, and then I can let you know what the compromise is.
Okay. So that,
Well, I just want to,
Ask that the motion not commit us to cutting 7 trees.
that is where my confusion was on that very topic, is that up until today, it was 4 trees. If we're going to go out and do negotiation on prices, the park won't open. If we can get the 4 trees down, and we have enough money over to do cabling, and we're not causing a problem as for public safety, is that an avenue that we want to take? Or do we cut all 4 trees down so that we can theoretically start planting trees again? All 7, and then we start planting trees again. I just want the board to make sure that they're clear about what they're asking, because whatever the decision is today, we have to move forward with getting this open
We
quickly.
have another meeting on Thursday. Can we get clarification on the trees and then come back on Thursday with this?
I guess we could. What a great idea.
Stick with me, kid.
If the manager could get that all done, yes, we could do that Thursday night. So, are you on board?
I will
Okay.
do the best I can.
Okay. Okay, so the next item is the closed motion, I'm sorry, rate committee. So we have to appoint a rate committee, an ad hoc rate committee, which that's something the mayor does, to look at the rates that we're having. Theoretically, it still includes the sewer, because we still have that. And I am going to ask Alderman Lay, Alderman Spencer, and myself to be on that rate committee.
Could you clarify what rates you're talking about?
These would be different fees, that type of thing. I'm bringing to you guys as the board different other revenue options, because Lance and Dory and I have worked with the School of Government to bring you every other option you possibly could